Hello again and welcome back. I am Jared Case, curator of film exhibitions at the Dryden Theater and the George Eastman Museum, with another streaming recommendation for you. We're going into the past, back to mid-century America, and I've got a special guest with me today to talk about the film. Please welcome Nora Fiore.
Hi, Jared. Pleased to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
It's wonderful to see you again. It's been almost 2 years now since the last Nitrate Picture Show, when you were actually at the museum. So it's great to know that you're still out there and still watching movies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I feel like this has been my coping mechanism for not going to all of the festivals I used to go to that I love, of which Nitrate Show is always a highlight. Every year I've gone to it, is just to be trying to revisit old favorites and binge watch as many older films as I can during quarantine.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, is how are you coping without being able to go to the cinema, but hopefully these recommendations and other places to access films at home have been some sort of comfort, but maybe it's priming you to get back into the theater.
Oh yeah, I mean, I certainly, the theaters I've been to, they haunt my dreams. I feel like a lot of what I've been doing in quarantine, in addition to trying to explore films and just kind of get my fix that way by watching my DVDs and Blu-rays and streaming recommendations and things like that, has just been to replay so many of the good memories I've had at festivals like Nitrate Show, kind of visualizing what it's like to go into the theater and sit down. Oh, remember when we saw the red shoes and we were all lined up for a half hour after dinner and we're going, oh, this is going to be amazing. Remember kind of the screen tests of Joan Fontaine we saw after Rebecca that year. So kind of, revisiting some of these memories to keep me warm in the absence of actually being able to go there and see it, which is, there's no substitute for it, but the memories have been very consoling, shall we say.
And you've been not only an eager participant, but a great advocate for the festivals that you do go to. As a matter of fact, you were the social media liaison for one of the Nitrate Picture Shows. Was it the fourth?
I think it was actually, might have been the third. I think I had to miss the second because there was a conflict, but I remember it was the one where Winchester 73 was shown, and also the red shoes, I believe, because I remember making GIFs of them to have ready to go for the chat, the Twitter account of the Nitrate Show.
Your social media activities don't just pertain to the festivals that you go to, but you're very active on a regular basis with that as well.
Yes, on Twitter, my username is Nitrate Diva, and this was a project I started after I graduated college. I was a film and French double major, and I immediately got into a line of work where I didn't really get to use either of the things I'd studied in school, but I think that happens to a lot of film majors. So I wanted a place to scream my opinions and thoughts and love for film into the void, and surprise, surprise, some people actually started listening, go figure. So it's very strange to me that many more people know me as Nitrate Diva than know me by my real name, when that was a username I chose when I was 21. It's kind of strange that this has become what I'm identified with. But yes, it's a real pleasure to be part of this thriving online community around film, specifically around classic film. I know a lot of people who are involved in TCM Party or, Noir City or even Nitrate Show, this kind of online community. It's a really supportive community. I feel like people are very fused by passion without a lot of the backbiting or sort of petty arguments you might see in the larger film Twitter, because we know that this is such a niche culture, that these are films that we feel very bound to be advocates for. We kind of are united in that common purpose of saying, hey, these old films, they're great, they're so wonderful, and here are all the ways in which they're wonderful. Here are all the different pleasures you can get from these films, and why they're still important and valid, and really something we should all be exploring, whether you're watching it at home. And also, I do try as much as possible to share how important the theatrical experience is when I have the privilege of being a part of that. And Nitrate Show has been a big thing that I've seen a lot of curiosity around. Wow, they still do that. They still project nitrate. What's that like? Is that dangerous? Are you scared? No, I'm not. If I see the reels, I project it, talking about why does it matter? Is there a difference? What's going on here? So it's been a real treat for me to be able to attend those festivals and sort of become a little bit of an ambassador, officially or not, for what that experience has been like, because it's just been magnificent.
And we very much appreciate not only your support, but the support of the online community, which has been so helpful in getting the word out about the festival. There's only 500 seats available in that theater for each show, so it's not like one of the larger festivals where you can sell a bunch of tickets. So getting the word out is always important for that. And it was your handle that really fit so well for us with the Nitrate Picture Show. But the film you've chosen to recommend is not from the nitrate era, actually.
No, just a little bit after that. Although it's funny because the more I was thinking about it, it really reminds me a lot of a film that I remember very vividly you introducing at the first Nitrate Picture Show, that is to say, Leave Her to Heaven. So I think there's a lot of parallels between that when we're talking about color crime cinema, kind of contradiction in terms, but color noir. And the film is, of course, A Kiss Before Dying, which is the 1956 United Artists film starring Robert Wagner and Virginia Leith. I'm glad that you enjoyed this film as much as I do.
I'm not sure if anybody can enjoy it as much as you do, but it was a first-time watch for me. It was something that had not been on it's been on my radar, but something I hadn't had a chance to see before. But very happy that I could watch this and catch up with it. Some very interesting things going on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the plot of the film?
Sure. So the film centers on a very noir anti-hero figure, this Machiavellian college student, returning, war veteran Bud Corliss, whose absolute goal in life is to marry a rich girl and land himself into a life of ease and plenty and power. So he becomes involved with a co-ed whom he calls Dory. The trouble is, and we see this is where the film starts, Dory's pregnant and her father is very strict. Bud realizes that the father, who's holding the purse strings for this copper fortune, will never consent to their marriage, knowing that she's pregnant, will never consent to their marriage without, going through all the proper channels where he meets them, and, just a very strict traditional family. So he realizes that he has two choices. One, he can abandon all of his hopes of wealth and plenty, or he can eliminate Dory. And that is the option that he takes. It's a crime drama. I know that's a little bit of a spoiler there, but hey, the title is A Kiss Before Dying, so I don't think I'm giving too much away there. But once Dory is out of the way, he dreams up a really remarkable plan B to try to see if he can still land himself in the clover. And I enjoy this film for the way it is so steeped in the noir tropes, which by 1956 had really been played out in so many different ways. If we talk about Maltese Falcon as really, kind of the patient zero for film noir. I mean, you could argue Stranger on the Third Floor is doing it earlier, but it really arrives with Double Indemnity. But, by 1956, so many variations on the tropes have been worked. So I feel like this film is so conscious of what we expect from a crime film. And it really is playing on so many of the patterns. You've got this fatale, you've got but you also have this girl detective angle. You have the pregnancy, which is actually dealt with much more explicitly, I think, than it could have been 10 years ago. By 1956, the production code had relaxed to the point where they can actually say, I'm pregnant. I mean, wow, it's, today that's entirely not shocking to us. But in 1956, this was racy stuff that, unwed mother and, making all these choices about how are we going to deal with this. And of course, it's even more explicit in the book. But I just think it's a really marvelous film that is not only playing on those tropes, but it has a completely different look from what you would expect from what I've told you of the plot. When we talk about film noir, we talk about crime drama, the Venetian blind shadows and the dark alleyways, but this, like Leave Her to Heaven, it has a look that is almost defiantly not what you would expect from a film with these kinds of dark themes that's centered on an anti-hero. It's set in the Southwest. It has this beautiful regional flavor. So much of it is taking place in the sunlight, in the open air. And through that, the perverse prettiness of what we're seeing really ties into the protagonist, who is so charming and so smooth and so seductive. And yet, you can tell he's too perfect. He just handles himself a little too well for someone who is honest and feels emotions, as I like to think we all do. So it's a marvelous performance from Robert Wagner, who is very young. And yet, even so, if you read what they were talking about it in the fan magazines, they were kind of saying that this was part of a comeback for him, that he was trying to relaunch his career as a little bit of a bad boy and create some frisson and some interest around him from that in that way. And I think having, we've both read the Ira Levin novel that this film is based on, and it's really impressive to me how much Robert Wagner is able to convey the conceitedness and the vanity of this character without the impressive internal monologue that Ira Levin gives them. One moment that really stood out to me reading the book is he's up on the rooftop, right, about to do something very wicked, and he's so proud of how he's planned this, how he's improvised all this, and he thinks he wishes he could be in front of a mirror and run his hand through his hair. And you just go, that's the essence of this character. Robert Wagner really gets that essence of this character, that every moment he is loving this and loving himself doing it. That makes it all the more chilling. So in that way, it also reminds me of Leave Her to Heaven, where the beauty of the character and kind of how she controls this whole situation. She's placed herself at the center of this drama, and it's beautiful like her, but it's chilling like her. The same phenomenon applies to A Kiss Before Dying. If you love Leave Her to Heaven, I know that's a very popular film. I think A Kiss Before Dying should be next on everybody's list of color noirs to see. And this one also gives us the added bonus of CinemaScope, not just deluxe color, not Technicolor, but also CinemaScope. So beautiful compositions throughout.
Yeah, that is a wonderful, wonderful synopsis and setup. And there's so many things that you got into that I'd love to explore. I just recently, when I was doing research on the film, I did see that the book was published a few years earlier, but immediately I think Robert Wagner had been in talks to do it. So it's maybe even in the early 50s as opposed to the mid 50s. As you say, it's a bit of a comeback. He's growing into more mature roles. But I think that's really interesting that even during his sort of previous high point, he was thinking about doing other roles for this. But it was, and I almost need to spend an entire weekend with just the movie and the book to make sure that I've got this right. But, we introduced Wagner as Bud Corliss, but in both the book and the movie, I don't think that they mention his name, because it is sort of a reveal that he is known to other members of Dory's family.
Yes, and obviously the film kind of negates the way in which that can be as shocking as it is in the book. You just kind of hear this name caught from a letter, and then finally it's like, wait, that's Bud. Oh no. Whereas the film, you've kind of got him visualized. So I feel like even as you hear, oh, okay, Bud, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm gonna go do this. You're kind of thinking, wait a second, what's going on here? I feel like there's a lot more hints dropped. I apologize if I have inadvertently spoiled it in any way. I do know a lot of the publicity materials kind of already showed that. So I think, this spoiler as a very modern concept may not have really interfered with people's enjoyment of it back then as much as we do now. And, you kind of know he's going to come back into the orbit. But yes, it's interesting the way in which the film tried to create that element of surprise that the novel does. I know that was an element that Stephen King, who's spoken very highly of the novel, said is one of its great coups, that it's able to pull this off, where you have this nameless character who suddenly is referred to and then turns up in this startling way, and then the heroine recognizes him, and you go, oh, wait a second, that's him, no way. And as she's conducting her investigation with each name that comes up, you're kind of thinking, well, wait, is this the guy? Is this not the guy? Especially reading the book after having seen the film was in some ways a more shocking experience than if I hadn't seen the film, because it really does depart from it. And well, and I know we said we wanted to stay out of, book to film comparisons too in depth, but the fact that there are not two sisters, but three in the book, and that all of them cross paths with this very seductive monster and are marked, some of them, and without giving too much, that it doesn't go well for any of them. But the fact that the film compresses it to two sisters, I think, was a wise cinematic decision. Otherwise, you really would have gotten into a saga there. And I think they did a nice job of adaptation, although I was surprised how much of the film really is in the book. I mean, the whole first sequence with Dory, all of that, and then, the beginning of Ellen's investigation and Dwight Powell, that's all very much in the book. But then it veers off very much in a different direction. Although one notable book to film note I did want to make, one way in which reading the book illuminated the film for me, and for people who are watching it for the first time, I wanted to call this out because it was not clear to me, was the World War II, or the veteran subtext of the film, which is done very subtly because when we're talking about film noir, I mean, so much of that is obliquely dealing with World War II trauma, with all these obsessively recurring themes of guilt and amnesia and explorations of unbalanced mental states. It's really dealing with World War II trauma. But I thought it was interesting how much the book is very explicit about the way in which killing during World War II, how killing a Japanese soldier prepared Bud for being able to kill Dory. That, he knows he can kill because he's done it before. Obviously, the film doesn't explore all of his backstory. It starts very wonderfully and dramatically with just Dory crying and him comforting her, and you sensing the coldness behind his comfort and thinking, okay, this is not going to go well here. But rewatching the film after reading the book, I noticed all these different cues that are marking him as a veteran. Like, for instance, the war souvenirs on his desk, the shell casings, that Dory refers to, the check from the government, his war wound he refers to, and perhaps most Riley, when he leaves the building and sees the Mutual building, this idea forms in his head. There's a poster behind him saying there's something about a soldier. So I thought that was just an interesting little ways to get that subtext in there without having to do a whole backstory sequence. So I was really impressed by how elegantly the film was capturing some of the subtext of the book without having to backtrack and give the whole life story of this character, with really starting in the center of things, starting with the action of the main plot.
Yeah, and I wonder if the film maybe is not seen as much because all of the promotion that we need to do for it to get somebody to watch it is dealing with a character played by an actor. And suddenly, you're losing that surprise. And it was, when I was reading the book, and the reason that I read the book after the movie was because of the structure, this sort of 50-50 structure. And the book is nearly broken up equally, and it's 70 pages for each sister that it covers. But going back and reading it, it was because I had seen the film and I knew who was in it, and they really hit that surprise of it being Bud played by Robert Wagner, with the score really comes in and hits it. And I was reading the book and I sort of got to the 2/3 point, and it was like people are realizing that this is who it is. And I had 140 pages to go back and read to see if his name was mentioned at all in the first two parts. But it was like, wow, that was really something that was unusual for the time. And I think you're right about certainly about film noir dealing with post-war angst. But there was this period of time where young men who had been in the military for 4 or 6 years are coming back, and they're going back to college. And so this is one of the ways that they were trying to reintegrate themselves back into normal life. And this is an example of that, but also Five Against the House was another one that dealt with older men, not necessarily 18 to 20-year-olds who are going to college, but that had been deferred by the war, that get into this idea that they can sort of take what they want because they are pursuing that American dream in the way that America has given them the tools to do. So I thought that was a really interesting comparison with that 1950s cinema as well.
Yeah, I love that you bring up Five Against the House, because it's not only is it the veteran trauma, I mean, you see that in a lot of noir films, like The Blue Dahlia or Act of Violence, Ride the Pink Horse, they talk about him being a veteran. He's having flashbacks to the jungle, the high wall, but both A Kiss Before Dying and Five Against the House are dealing with it, and specifically in this collegiate context, which seems like a very strange combination today. But back then, I think, was a very, very, just part of the fabric of campus life. I know when I worked for Middlebury College, which is where I attended, I would go back through and find little stories out of the old yearbooks and things like that. And one from the 40s, there's all these pages about, our veterans and their families in some cases that are living off campus, all these pictures of these men who are about 10 years older than the average college student there with their wives and kids. There's all these celebrations of them in the yearbook. So that was very much part of campus life, I think, is maybe an aspect of our culture that I haven't seen explored in pop culture as much as I would have expected, given how much it is. I know Vertigo also alludes to the fact that everybody's sort of going, wait, how did Johnny and Scotty and Midge go to college? There's all this year's part. Well, he's going on the GI Bill, so that's why he's so much older than her, yet they're college chums. So Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of moment in time that these films capture. That's great to talk about. It's
Yeah.
actually funny because I found an article in an old trade paper that was talking specifically about how the War Department communicated with Hollywood and said, look, there's going to be a lot of people coming back with combat fatigue, with, you know, just kind of they're dealing with their experiences. Can you depict this more on the screen? Can you show this so that people, I mean, you know, kind of, I had read all these scholars talking about, oh, you know, it's dealing with World War II trauma. I'm going, okay, you know, maybe in some abstract way. And then I found that article, I go, wow, they actually were directly asked to do this. But it's funny how the article is saying, yeah, I think they got a little more than they bargained for, because they're not always these sensitive dramas about men reintegrating into society. A lot of them are very dark and rather unflattering, and in some cases very unsympathetic to, you know, those traumas, dealing with them in this very underground way. So yeah, A Kiss Before Dying is a good example of that, of the way in which it's exploring that darkness in a way that I doubt the War Department would have felt very comfortable with, but is not generalizing in that darkness. He is clearly a very unique case of someone who was already a loaded gun before he got his war service, that just really gave him the knowledge that, yes, I'm capable of this and I can do it again out of uniform.
Yeah, he had that nature in him, and it was the nurturing of the military that got him to the point where he could use that to his own ends.
Yes, and although not just the nurturing of the military, and this is one way in which I really love the film over the book, because I feel like the book puts a lot of the fault on the mother, who is not only a nag, but she's also clueless. She's really very willfully ignorant of what's going on. You get the feeling, I mean, it's kind of the cliched mother issues as the epicenter of the psychosis, of the epicenter of the evil. You know, how many serial killer dramas they write the profile, he has issues with his mother. It's always the mother's fault. So I like that, you know, even though the book seems to lay the fault significantly at the mother's door, that she's sort of nagged and needled him into becoming this person who has an unquenchable thirst for power and achievement. I think that the film, you know, especially Mary Astor's performance, makes her much more of a tragic figure, where she has had to cope as best she can, and that the son, she's a victim of her son as well. Like, I love the bit of business where he's like, pick out my tie, mom, and she picks out the tie. He leaves the room, kind of rolls his eyes, and picks out another tie. You know, and the way he humiliates her in front of the wealthy family. I know Robert Wagner was really over the moon excited to work with Mary Astor, and she gives a wonderful performance in this, kind of suggesting that it's not her fault that he turned out this way, that she's a good person who dealt with this as best she could. She's really a single mother, you get the sense. And I appreciate the way the film depicts her with a lot more sympathy and kindness than the book does, where she's a little bit of the culprit behind it all, a little almost the more suburban version of the white heat mother, who's really pushing him to do these things, you know, without really realizing what is the impact of what she's done there. And that's another thing I love about this film, is that you've got the younger generation, you know, you've got Joanne Woodward, you've got Robert Wagner, Virginia Leigh, all these up and coming stars, but you also have the noir emeritus of Mary Astor and George Macready as, you know, the parents of the two factions, which I think is a nice touch, and kind of puts it even more in the dialogue of how much this film was influenced by the films that came before, and how much it's reflecting that noir heritage. And actually, while we're on the subject of noir heritage, I did want to talk a little bit about the director Gerd Oswald, who's not someone who gets talked about, despite having directed this excellent film, and also Crime of Passion with Barbara Stanwyck, another excellent film. But he had an interesting trajectory where he was a director's son, and he was an assistant director, a second unit director. And when you look at the films that he was assistant director or second unit director on, you can see the way in which this film, which was his feature film debut, is the culmination of all of that experience. He had worked on two films that get labeled Technicolor noir a lot. That is Desert Fury with Elizabeth Scott, which is also with Mary Astor, very lurid, very similar ambiance of the desert and all these passions going on in the open air. And he had also worked on Niagara with Marilyn Monroe. So, you know, another really fantastic use of color where it's unexpected in a crime drama. So I think he really must have absorbed a lot about how to use color for a contemporary crime drama, and use that sensuality in the service of suspense, you know, creating these surface textures that are hinting at something much deeper and darker and uglier below the prettiness and the red lipstick and the lush color there. He'd worked with Billy Wilder. I see that he has a credit, you know, he IMDb says he worked with him on A Foreign Affair and Sunset Boulevard. He was at least, you know, on those sets, and he really had said that he learned a lot by observing those great directors. So I mean, you watch a film like this and think, wow, this is his feature debut, and this is a really impressive production, impressive film, you know, working with big stars, and gets really nice performances out of them. But he had all of this background in Hollywood, watching the great directors doing some of their best work. So I can see where he learned. He really must have been paying attention and absorbing what was going on around him. Another funny thing to note is that he had worked on Prince Valiant with Robert Wagner a couple years before, where it seems like Robert Wagner stole Louise Brooks's hairdo, where he's got the black bob and, you know, playing Prince Valiant. I mean, how different can it get from Prince Valiant to Bud Corliss? And yet, as a character, it's so in dialogue with that image of his as the white knight, as the handsome, you know, hero. That's kind of how all these women in his life want to see him, but he is in fact, you know, corrupt to the core. So it's a really marvelous film, and I think Oswald does a great job. I was rewatching it. I was really impressed by how he'll just really let a take run, you know, especially the scenes between Dory and Bud. How, you know, the scenes where they're discussing, okay, I'm pregnant. What are we going to do? You know, what are we going to live on? How are we going to get around this? There's a couple of pretty long takes where it's just dialogue, and yet really holds your attention. I really think he had a lot of confidence in these performances, and in just really letting them do their thing and wrapping you up in the intimacy of the moment. And I like that there's not too many big reveals of how evil he is. He really, you know, you can feel that something's off here without having to really broadcast it until he, you know, goes and gets the poison, obviously. And then you're like, okay, yeah, what we are sensing there is really, it's real. It's very much at work here.
It does seem like an evolution of the genre and an acknowledgement of that, certainly as we go from black and white to color, and we go from Academy ratio to scope ratio. But it's the way that it's handled by Oswald is very interesting. Not only casting Mary Astor or George McCready, but that so many of the most nefarious conversations happen during the daylight, and things that would normally be hidden and undercover in older noir in the shadows are handled out in the sunlight. So it's now an evolution that evil no longer hides in the dark, and now it's out in the open, or that it exists in the open, and now we're sort of exploring that aspect of it as well. But the way that Oswald shoots it, sometimes the characters have their backs turned to the camera, so you're not necessarily seeing their face, or that scene where they're sitting on the bleachers, I'm thinking of, where a lot of it is shot from a distance. So you're still not necessarily getting those close-ups or those medium shots that are really focusing on the actors' performances. And the audio is dubbed in later, so that even then you're getting sort of a sinister feeling from the framing of the film that something's not quite right. Because in a normal film, this kind of subject matter, two people talking about a pregnancy, it's very emotional for them. So, you know, they would be facing each other or facing the camera. We would get some sort of idea about their emotions in relation to that. But instead, you know, it's in silhouette, or they have their backs to the camera, it's in shadow, and you're not getting that personal connection, particularly with Bud, that we would expect to get from a film, which helps distance us from the character and gives us that feeling that something's not quite right.
Right. And I even love from that opening shot how well that's set up, from the pan around her, all of his clippings on the wall as you hear her crying. So it from the first, it's focused on his ego, his sense of self, his drive to advance himself at the cost of you know, these women's lives, you know, the sobbing in the background. Then finally you see her, but his back's to the camera, and just the coldness and this kind of reserve, this distance that you're calling out is really fundamental in making us feel that this is not going anywhere good, even before the film gives us any real concrete reason to feel like that. Yeah, and actually, I believe, yeah, the cinematographer on this was Lucien Ballard, who the same year, I believe, worked on another film that's very in dialogue with all the noir that came before it. You know, The Killing, Stanley Kubrick's The Killing, and he had. I think he's probably best known as Lucien Ballard. That is for, you know, his work with Merle Oberon, with whom he was married. You know, he invented the Obi light to work on her. It's also interesting to me the way in which the two women in the film are set up so differently. You know, I think I have to. It's a shame for me. I was reading that Joanne Woodward really hated her performance in this and really hated the film. She thought it was terrible. She really did not have good memories at all of this. But I think she's really perfect. I think she does a great job, sort of like the wife in Rashomon, where you want to pity her. You know that as a human being, you feel for what she's gone through, and yet the performance is going against that grain, where there's something irritating about it, and that aligns us unwillingly with Bud, that she's annoying. There's something a little too cloying, a little too naive, a little too pie in the sky about her, and you're just going, oh God, please quiet. You know, why are you talking still? So I think that's interesting, as opposed to Virginia Leith, who's more in the kind of Ella Raines girl sleuth detective vein, especially where she's hunting down and looking for the clues. It annoyed me a little bit the way in which the film misdirects, where she seems like she's driving the action forward, and then the sleuthing gets passed off to another character, to the Jeffrey Hunter character. That kind of annoyed me when I first watched. Then I read the book and thought, no, that's actually not so bad of what could happen to her. I guess that's fine. You know, she just kind of becomes that, and she does get a lot of agency in the end. I mean, in the book, he is confronted in the end by a sister. But I do think that she takes a much more active role in kind of putting all the pieces together at the end, and bringing home what he did, and telling him, you know, you're insane. This is, you know, without giving too much away, I think the way the second sister is treated is pretty interesting. And I do appreciate the way in which she suggests that this has been a wrenching experience for her, but one she's going to get over in the end.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the sisters and the actresses that play them. And it's actually the three women in the film, because we also have to deal with Bud's mother. And I think there's a real similarity between Dory and his mother that he feels comfortable with. If we, you know, go back and parse it out, he was dealing with Ellen before, but he sees something familiar in Dory that he feels like he's got decades of experience sort of manipulating or exploiting, that can go that way. And it's just sort of an accident that she gets pregnant. Now he's got this new thing to deal with, but he's always pushing her in that direction. As much as she may annoy him with her petty preferences, he's always getting her to go where he wants her to go, to the point where it's ultimately that trip up the staircase that is the last decision that she's allowed to make for herself.
Right.
But I mentioned before, it was really the structure of the film that made me want to go back and read the book. And we say, it's broken up, the first half and the second half with the two sisters, and the book is broken up between the three sisters. But this structure and the change of the structure is something that comes up again and again when we look at classic Hollywood and adaptations from books. For instance, Letter to Three Wives was written as Letter to Five Wives. And the structure of Laura was very interesting in book form, because it did have that changing perspective. It was about 5 different sections in various lengths, but it went from the detective to Laura and back. And it was very interesting in the way that, and they all seem to be simplified when they go from the book to the movie. So the movie can't be as complex. From 5 to 3, from 3 to 2, the changing perspective just to Dana Andrews and Laura. It's very interesting. Adaptation is always something that's fascinated me. So it was really good to see this structure at least kept, if it not simplified, for the film as well.
Yes, I adaptation is a bit of a fascination of mine, especially lately. I've been working on some projects where I've been looking into adaptations of plays. I recently did audio commentaries for Tight Spot and the Criminal Code for Indicator. And so I had to look into these plays and look at this work of restructuring and simplification. I am fascinated, especially with crime novels, because so much of the structure is so zigzagging. The whole goal, if you're writing one of these, roman de gare, where you're writing one of these novels that it's just meant to be read and kind of keep you on the edge of your seat, the goal is antithetical to what a film is trying to do, where it's trying to be very elegant and keep you on track, as opposed to if you're writing one of these pulp novels where it's zigzagging you all around. I know I recently read Deadlier Than the Male by James Gunn, which is the basis for Born to Kill, and boy, they cut a whole lot out of that. There's a whole psychoanalyst that gets cut out. There's the fatale, he has a sister and her sister has a boyfriend, he's axed out of it. They really, while keeping the essence of the film, which is this psychopathic love story, actually kind of similar to Born to Kill, in that it's similar to A Kiss Before Dying, in that it's an fatale movie, as more, although there's also a femme fatale in that one too. But just the work of simplification to really keep the essence of what makes the story so depraved and scary and upsetting, while simplifying it so that it just has this more elegant through line that makes for a motion picture. It's interesting. I feel like the fatales don't get as much attention, but really there's a very strong strain of that through these classic crime films of the era. You think Shadow of a Doubt. I know one that is overlooked a little bit, but Danger Signal. I would not be surprised if that was a big influence on Ira Levin in writing this, because it's a very similar character. You've got the two sisters, Zachary Scott, kind of this very slinky, insinuating character, has a lot of Bud Corliss in him. He's pretending to be a veteran. I don't believe he actually is one in that. And it even has the same plot device of tricking someone into writing a suicide note, which is, something you see in a couple of film noirs. You see it in Danger Signal. Also, The Unsuspected, Claude Rains does that. So I feel like Ira Levin, and his first novel, is really drawing on a lot of these things he may have seen in other films, and popping them into this framework. It's sort of like with Deadlier Than the Male, which is another first novel. There's something very first novelish about it, where it's this writer who is showing off in the best of ways. So I feel like the film kind of tamps that down a little bit. It feels a little more like a standard crime melodrama, a little more like a soap opera gone wrong or something like that. It doesn't feel quite so zigzaggy and pulpy and violent, which in some ways is a loss. Like, I feel like there's a lot of dark humor in the book that doesn't quite make it to the film. Specifically, I think of the scene when Dory is supposed to have taken the pills, and instead she pops up, and he's thinking, he's comfortably thinking, she's dead, I'm all fine, and there she is, and he goes, in the film there's just this track into him on this look of, like, really one of the only times in the whole film where you see anything other than total coolness on his face. But in the book, it's hilarious how he's thinking, that bitch, she lied, you tried to kill her, but you're angry that she lied. It's kind of her one act of really serious rebellion. As you say, like his mother, she's very easily led around and pushed around and manipulated. So that one act of, like, guile on her part, that she wants to have this baby, she wants to trap him in that way, is a bit more vivid in the book. But it's still quite a moment in the film where he's, like, staggering out of the class going because he thought she was dead and she's not. So it's got a couple nice twists and turns in it, but it is not as twisty or as turny as the book. And I do think that's for the best when we're talking about a film. You need something to hang on to. It can't throw you in all these different directions. If it does, it becomes The Big Sleep or The Lady from Shanghai, both of which are great films, but boy, don't put a gun to my head and ask me to do a plot diagram, because I couldn't do it.
The catch-22.
And I love in the class, what are they learning the day before? It's Puritanism, it's predestination, it's nature versus nurture. That's actually not in the book. I thought that was kind of, I don't believe it's in the book. It's kind of this nice novelistic little thing where you think, oh, they probably lifted that from the book, but no, that's subtext added for the movie. So you can see there's a real intelligence suffusing this film, that it could have just been a very surface melodrama, but in fact they're doing some interesting things with it in a lot of interesting ways. I think I really it's a film that can be enjoyed on a lot of different levels. On the one hand, it's just a great yarn with a couple of nice turns to it. It's got some great performances. It's the lushness of what we're seeing, the cinemascope, and it is especially interesting to me as this film that is reflecting all these different currents and themes and noir, and as you said, kind of almost taking a look back at it in color and looking at all these ways to twist them around in interesting fashions.
I think that is a wonderful summary. I think we have given everyone more than enough reason to want to watch this film. And they can go.
Wait, I want to give people one more reason. I
sure.
definitely wanted to read this before I am done. So I did a little bit of research on the Media History Digital Library. I just wanted to read this quote because I thought this was hilarious. So this is from The Pilot, which is the official newspaper of the Catholic Archdiocese. And it really didn't I'm sure it hated A Kiss Before Dying, the film itself, but this is what it disliked just about the advertising. It said, the suggestive drawings, which may cover several columns in the newspapers, put a lurid emphasis on sex, indecency, passion, and violence. So if we haven't quite excited enough interest there, I just need to note that it was a film that a lot of people were unhappy about. Not just the film itself, even just the way it was advertised, people were really unhappy with it, and felt that it was needlessly lurid and sexy and doing all this daring stuff. So I know today we may watch it and think, this is weak tea. I think at the time it's just important to kind of dial yourself back to 1956 and think about just how shocking a lot of this would have been to see on the screen if you'd never seen it, if you'd never really seen these kinds of unwed relationships, these college relationships explored in this way. So kind of put yourself in a mental time machine and think back to that, and it will seem all the more noirish to you, I think.
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that, we still have people that are, criticizing films from seeing the trailers as opposed to watching the entire film.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Advertising does so much of it, doesn't it?
I know. It's getting to the essence, I guess. But this film is available to stream on Amazon Prime Video. So if you've got the Prime, you can stream that for free. Otherwise, it is for rental on Amazon as well. Thank you, Nora, for coming in and bringing this suggestion, having a great conversation. I'm looking forward to the next time that you can get down to Rochester and we can have discussions about nitrate or something else.
I'm looking forward to it with all my heart. I really can't wait to be back at the Dryden and just generally back in theaters, doing what I love, watching old movies and new movies.
Before you go, I do have a little panel of questions that I've been asking people about cinematic experience, if you're willing.
Absolutely, fire away.
All right. So number one, what is your first cinematic memory?
Oh, my first cinematic memory. It's probably an obvious one for someone of my generation, and that would be going to see the big new Disney film with my friends in Philadelphia, and that was Hercules at the time, which was a film I was especially excited about because I loved Greek myths even at that time, and that film is also significant for me just in the Disney canon, because unsurprisingly, as someone who loves film noir now, I always identified with the villains, always liked the villains best. Hades, Scar, Ursula, the villains were the ones I was zeroing in on. Didn't really relate to the good guys so much, but the kind of the ones who were holding the grudges and looking in that way, I enjoyed that very much, the Disney villains. So unfortunately, given how much of the media landscape Disney owns, I feel like such a cliche citing a Disney film, but that is probably one of my first real memories of watching a film, especially in a theater.
And you already mentioned the theater that you went to there. Is that a theater that you went to on a regular basis? Is there a theater when you were growing up you have strong memories of?
I'm not sure that I really do. Well, I guess so. In the sense that, I mentioned Philadelphia. That's where I was born. Then we moved to Vermont, and theaters here are very different. They're not these big multiplexes like you have down in Pennsylvania. The theatrical experience here is much more small and intimate. And we have probably the biggest movie theater near me is in Rutland, Vermont, that has a couple of screens on it, but nothing big. So probably the local theater that used to be there in Manchester, Vermont, where I saw couple of really great films. I think the last thing I saw there was Phantom Thread. I believe it's shuttered now. Sadly, I remember them making the transition to digital and that being big news in the town, and there being a whole lot of crowdfunding around that. I saw some kind of movies geared towards tweens and teens there when I was young. So that's a fond memory for me growing up. Before I really got into trying to see some of the classic movies I wanted to see on the big screen, which involves a lot of travel, unfortunately, in my case.
Far away from Vermont, where you're living.
Yeah.
What is your favorite sensory experience when you go to the cinema?
Oh gosh, that's tough. I mean, hard to beat the popcorn.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of been haunting my dreams, the smell of popcorn, how much I like that. But for me, I'm just gonna say I really love the Junior Mints. I just love, there's nothing better than when the hush descends over everybody and you've got your box of Junior Mints there. That's one of my Junior Mints, and the snow caps. I'm a big partisan for snow caps. I saw a list a couple of years ago that put that as the absolute worst movie theater candy, and like I felt betrayed. I felt personally attacked by that. So probably that. Yeah, my least favorite sensory experience, I have to bring this up, is how thirsty I get in art house theaters that don't involve water. That's the one thing. Like, I'm not one of these people that needs to have a snack in the film, but boy, I get so thirsty. And one time when I was in Paris, it's like the Dryden, you're not allowed to take anything in a lot of these Paris art house theaters. I didn't know that when I first got there. I had a bottle of water and I reached down and got it. And boy, didn't the French lady behind me call me out for that in French. I'm like, I'm sorry, it was just a bubble, So yes, that's my least favorite sensory experience in a theater. But definitely for me, it's all about the concession candy and just kind of that hush when everybody finally is quiet and settles in for the film. That's the great moment, isn't it?
Where do you sit when you go to the theater?
Oh boy, I really do like to be pretty close to the screen. Not so close I have to crane my neck like that, but kind of like maybe third row side is ideal for me. Although I have learned in the Dryden that I really do also like kind of the back side. Kind of when you take some of these back rows and on the side, the wings. I think that's a really good seating too. I know the last nitrate show was really well attended. It seemed like everybody got there to the screenings before me. I guess I was just being chatty with my friends beforehand. So a lot of times like, oh man, what's left? So I'm like, oh, I guess I'll take one of these ones here on the side towards the back. And I was like, oh, these are actually really great. And I got a really nice view of the screen there. When I'm at the Egyptian in Hollywood, I really love going to the balcony. I was actually really sad to hear that they will not have a balcony anymore soon, that they're restoring it. And so, gone are my balcony dreams of the Egyptian theater. But usually most theaters kind of like third, fourth row, side, or maybe center if I can get it. But a lot of times it's side because, there's always someone camped out there to get those center seats.
And one last question, less experiential. Is there a book that you can recommend for people to read while they're home, either about film noir or about some other aspect of film history?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something I read recently that I really enjoyed was The Speed of Sound, Scott Iman's book about the transition to sound. That's really great. I love film history books that not only give you a historical overview, but that really do kind of give you an anecdotal picture of it too. So I really love the way Iman is able to give you that trajectory while still making it feel human, while still giving you, sort of tidbits that feel gossipy. And the other one I really want to mention, I just opened up a whole new world for me, was Scoundrels and Spitballers, which is by Philippe Garnier. It's just was translated into English fairly recently. Garnier wrote it initially in French. It's been published through Eddie Muller's imprint, Blackpool Productions, I think it's called. And it's just this fascinating look at, we all talk about Ben Hecht and, a lot of the big name screenwriters, but this is really looking at the literary background in Hollywood. Some of these screenwriters who have been a little lost to time, because really what they were doing is they were just trying to make money doing it. They were great writers, but they didn't quite get to that echelon of acclaim and prestige. Like, for instance, reading about these two men who were had committed crimes and had been in San Quentin, Ernest Booth and Robert Tasker, who actually from San Quentin were writing stories and making a killing, in Hollywood. And then when they got out, were getting jobs as screenwriters, and hearing I mean, it's just a really wonderfully woven tapestry. It's, some of them are interviews, some of them are just, narratives. It's a really fascinating look. It's talking about Day of the Locust and just kind of some of the background, literary background that went into informing that. So it's a really varied and exciting look at the way writers who maybe are not as well known, especially some screenwriters who are sort of a footnote or maybe are better known for the novels they wrote, contributed to Hollywood and how Hollywood contributed to them. So I can't recommend that enough. Really great book.
That sounds fantastic. It's right down my alley. So I'm going to have to look that one up. Nora, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and talking about Robert Wagner and Kiss Before Dying and everything associated with it. It was a great conversation, and it's wonderful to hear from you again. And I hope that we can get to a point where we can open the Dryden soon and invite you down over the border of New Hampshire, Vermont, however many states you need to come over in order to see us again.
You call and I'll come, because it's one of my favorite places in the world to see movies. And, some of my favorite theater going memories are there. I mean, first movie I ever saw at a Nitrate Festival was, A Star is Born, followed by Casablanca. I mean, how do you beat that? That's just memories I will cherish always. And I can't wait to see what you have got cooked up for the next one, whenever it is. I'm excited.
Well, we appreciate it so much. The fact that there are people out there willing to come from miles away to see it really means a lot. So thank you so much, Nora, and we will see you soon.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today.